Today, we are talking about Saint Mark Ji Tianxiang.
Tianxiang.
Okay, I'm not going to keep trying to butcher that name, so for the remainder of the video, I'll call him Mark Ji. Mark Ji lived mostly in the late 1800s. He was a physician in China who was known to be kind to his patients and even treated people for free who couldn't afford his services. He was also a Catholic Christian who was devoted to the sacraments and the Mass, a rarity in China. When Mark Ji was in his 30s, he became ill with a stomach ailment. He treated it exactly like he would for any of his patients who came in with an achy stomach. He went to opium. It worked so well, he took it again the next day. And the next day. The next day.
The next day.
Mark Ji couldn't stop. He knew it was wrong, but at the time, people didn't understand addictions. They just figured if you couldn't stop taking the drug, it was because you didn't really want to. Mark Ji believed this as well. He confessed his sin over and over to his priest, but eventually the priest, believing as everyone else did, refused his absolution, thinking Mark Ji didn't really want to stop. Without absolution, Mark Ji was refused the Eucharist. This would be enough to turn a lot of people away from the faith, but not Mark Ji. He continued to go to Mass and continued to pray, asking for God's mercy. You see, Mark Ji longed for the Eucharist and felt great shame every time he gave into his addiction. It pulled him further and further in, while simultaneously pulling him further and further away from Jesus and the sacraments. He could not understand why he fell into this sin, why he prioritized it over the Eucharist, which he loved. He became so convinced that he was such a sinner that the only way to make it to heaven was to be martyred. So he prayed that very thing would happen. This went on for 30 years. In St. Paul's letter to the Romans, he writes, "I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate." I imagine Mark Ji found this verse very relatable, as many of us, if not all of us, do. In 1900, a group of martial artists became fed up with the spread of Christianity and the influence of the Western world in China. They decided the only way to preserve their culture was to rebel, and they did so violently in what we now know as the Boxer Rebellion. They rounded up as many Christians as they could find, Mark Ji and his family included, and imprisoned them. They demanded that the Christians renounce their faith or be beheaded. Mark Ji and his family refused and stood firm in their faith. I love the way Wikipedia words it. For the record, I'm not so sure about how accurate this date or number is either. I did find different information in other places. Anyway, Wikipedia says, on 7 July 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, Ji and 119 other Christians were rounded up and asked to renounce Christianity. Asked. Do you think they said please while asking? Will you please renounce Christianity? Pretty please? No? Oh well. We asked. Off with his head. Wikipedia, right? When asked by his grandson where they were going, Mark Ji replied, "We're going home." Mark Ji begged his captors to allow him to die last so that none of the Christians would die alone. He was granted this request and watched as each captive one by one, his children and grandchildren included, die by beheading. All the while praying out loud and trusting that they would all see God in heaven. When we fall deep into our own sin, we should remember the struggles of this great saint. Saint Mark Ji unsuccessfully fought an addiction that he didn't understand. Instead of falling into despair, however, he turned toward God and had faith that God would show him mercy. His great faith opened the door to his sainthood. We have learned a lot in the last 125 years about addiction and its effects on our brains. The church handles things very differently now, as do physicians. Sometimes there are entire religious communities of friars and sisters who work diligently to help those who are addicted to alcohol and drugs. Organizations like Catholic Charities provide safe housing, therapy for addictions, and basic needs, giving dignity back to those who have deeply struggled. I'll link to an article in the description below on what they're doing and encourage you to donate if you can. I would love to see programs like this spread nationwide and worldwide. Because of the nature of this video, I doubt YouTube is going to distribute it much. However, I really wanted to share the story of a saint who deeply struggled with sin, so I felt compelled to record this. I'm therefore asking you to share this video with anyone who thinks they are too deep into sin to be saints. Then, maybe watch my video on Saint Monica, who mourned the sinful behavior of a loved one, but whose persistent prayer paid off. Saint Mark Ji, pray for us.